Today we have the Democratic nominee for governor of Georgia, Stacey Abrams. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
So Brian Kemp has positioned himself as a moderate in this race based on his interactions with Trump. Is he?
No, Brian Kemp is a far-right extremist who, until January of 2021, called himself a Trump conservative. And his behavior actually reveals much more than any rhetoric he's leaning on today. This is a man who in his first year in office banned abortion in the state of Georgia after 6 weeks. In order to win a primary, he weakened gun laws so much so that we've seen a 23% increase in gun violence. He slashed $1 billion from education. He has refused to deploy $400 million for affordable housing, and he refuses to expand Medicaid and provide healthcare coverage to 500,000 Georgians, not because we can't afford it, but because he doesn't believe they deserve it. These are the behaviors, the actions, and the principles of a hard right conservative. One act of not committing treason does not change the narrative or the reality of who he is.
With that said, Brian Kemp also supported and signed SB 202 into law. That's the Republican-led legislature's voter suppression bill. What's been the impact of that piece of legislation?
We are fielding calls every single day from voters who are confused about how to fill out their absentee ballot applications, especially senior citizens who for 15 years automatically receive this application, from people who are disabled, who rely on absentee ballots to participate in elections, from naturalized citizens who have limited English proficiency, who are more comfortable filling out those ballots at home. And because he said he was frustrated with the results of 2020 and 2021, he made it harder to vote absentee. We know he also made it illegal to get water in line, when in the state of Georgia, we average between 4 to 8 hour lines for people of color, namely Black voters. He made it easier for white supremacists to challenge voting because they can now go into a county elections board and hand in a list of names and say, I don't think these people deserve to be voters. And in these counties, they are now required to consider every single challenge. And so far, more than 64,000 challenges have been lodged against voters. And we are noticing that they are disproportionately targeting people of color.
Okay, so I want to build on those county elections boards. Obviously, SB 202 allowed Republicans to reorganize local elections boards. In Spalding County, for example, the Democratic majority of 3 Black women was replaced by a white Republican majority. And the chairman of that board is now someone who endorsed Trump's stolen election claims. That was just one of, I believe, 6 county boards that have been reorganized by Republicans thus far. How concerned should we be about this? And is there any indication that this reorganization has had any impact on voting rights already?
Well, to start with the impact on voting rights, yes, we have seen some of these counties eliminate access to Sunday voting because Sunday voting was disproportionately used by Black voters in the last few election cycles. But the larger concern is that this is part of a national framework that Brian Kemp has been the lead architect of. The Voting Rights Act has been under attack for years, but we know that with the 2013 Shelby decision, we lost Section 5. With the Bronovich decision in 2021, we lost part of Section 2, which really looks at racial animus. And now there's another case called the Merrill case before the Supreme Court that will essentially eliminate Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which eliminates the Voting Rights Act. What that will mean in the next legislative session, in the next gubernatorial term, that the governor alone with the state legislature has the ability to set voting policies and voting rights. And if they can control both the laws and the implementation with absolutely no judicial review because the Voting Rights Act no longer requires it, someone who has made his living on voter suppression can now expand his franchise by taking away ours.
Just to go back to what you mentioned before about the tens of thousands of complaints that have been lodged with county elections boards, is there any way to determine, or do we know right now how many of those have been accepted, especially given that they're disproportionately against people of color?
So we know in Gwinnett County, it was about 37,000 that were filed. They were able to quickly process at least 22,000 and kick them out. In Cobb County, it was recently, I think, about 1,500 that they dismissed. But here's the problem. We're 3 weeks out from Election Day. We're less than a week out from early voting. We don't have an extra group of people in these county elections boards running these elections. So every one of these claims that has to be adjudicated is being done by the same person who also has to set up the ballot boxes, make sure the polling places are ready. We don't have the staffing for this. And they know it because they also made it illegal for these counties to apply for grants to help them find additional funding. And so we have to recognize that this isn't one or two pieces. This is a systemic attack on voter access. And Brian Kemp is the lead architect. He did it for 8 years as Secretary of State, and he has proudly proclaimed the same opportunity. He likes to say making it hard to cheat, although he also said there was no cheating. And so either you're lying then or you're lying now. And we know that the intention is to make it more difficult for voters, especially voters of color and younger voters, to access the ballot.
How has the issue of abortion changed the calculus in this race in Georgia?
It's been dramatic. We know that there are some outlier polls that in Republican polls, shockingly, the Republican is winning. But in almost every other poll, we are seeing dramatic increases in women. We are seeing that women are saying this issue matters. And we know that if you look at just the absentee ballot applications that have made it through the process, it used to be that roughly 52, 53% were from women. Now we're hitting 60% from women. And we know that this is a very strong signal that women are terrified. They're terrified not only of the law as it stands, but the fact that Brian Kemp says he doesn't actually believe in the exemptions for rape or incest, that under this law, they can be investigated for miscarriage, and that in the state of Georgia right now, pharmacists have the right to reject your prescription because they ideologically disagree with you. And the reason this is so terrifying is that, yes, those of us who can go from CVS and take our prescription over to Walgreens, congratulations. But imagine if you live in one of the 100 rural counties where you only have one pharmacist, and that's the only pharmacist who's willing to work with you on pricing. These are families being held hostage, women being held hostage.
I know that obviously abortion is a huge issue, if not the number one issue in this midterm cycle, but it's also not the only issue. What's been most resonant with the voters that you've spoken to aside from that issue of abortion?
So everyone is concerned about inflation and the economy. People are in pain, but what we have to recognize is that inflation is a global issue. And so the best thing a governor can do is reduce the costs that the governor can actually influence. That's housing, healthcare, and education. And on all three metrics, Brian Kemp refuses to act. Georgia has the money to create need-based aid in the state of Georgia to reduce student debt. He won't spend it. Georgia has the money to actually attack affordable housing issues. He won't spend it. $400 million sitting unspent because he won't spend the money. And we know with healthcare, Georgia is one of only 12 states in the nation that refuses to expand Medicaid. And in real terms, this means that we've lost 6 hospitals, including a level 1 trauma center in a state that only has 5 to begin with. So the entire Atlanta region of 5.7 million people has 1 level 1 trauma center left. But on top of that, 1,700 people are about to lose their jobs, and community members who simply need access to a doctor are now going to be told once again that their healthcare costs are going to go up because Brian Kemp doesn't want to accept the money they've already paid into the system, $3.5 billion.
Now, what does Georgia look like under a Governor Kemp versus Governor Abrams?
With Governor Kemp, we have seen in the last 4 years, he doesn't actually care about these issues. And more importantly, when given the opportunity, when given the resources, he refuses to help. But he has also spent the last 4 years attacking our freedoms, our freedom to vote, our freedom to choose, our freedom to be safe and secure in our persons. He has weakened gun laws and made it less safe for families to move around the state of Georgia. Governor Abrams is going to be a governor for more opportunity, more money in your pockets, and more freedom. As governor, I will expand Medicaid and make sure that families facing healthcare crises like cancer or diabetes actually get the healthcare that they need for less than $2 a day. That's what we can do. As governor, I will expand and make certain that we are investing in affordable housing, both rental housing and the ability to buy a house without having to, wait for a fire sale. I'm going to make sure our kids can go to school and get apprenticeships if they don't want to go to college, that they can go to technical college for free, and that we have need-based aid because we're one of only 2 states in the country that does not provide that kind of financial aid. And last but not least, I want to make certain that we can make a good living, whether you work for yourself or someone else. And that means closing what is right now a 100-year economic parity gap between people of color and majority communities. 48% of the population is people of color, but we're only 12.2% of the business revenue. The governor can close that gap in 15 years, but the current governor, his response to this being an issue for the last 20 years is that he's going to study it. I like to say he can cheat off of my paper. We know the answer. We just need a governor willing to do the work.
Now, data shows that about 95% of Georgians are now registered to vote. This will obviously be the first midterm cycle where that number is in play. Do you think that we're going to see another record-breaking turnout number from this state, just like we did in 2020, obviously, for the general election?
I think so. If we look back at 2018 in my first race, we actually had the highest number of Democrats voting in the state's history. And it wasn't quite the highest number for Republicans, but it was the highest number for Democrats, and we lost by about 55,000 votes. We know that we have built on those numbers year over year, including 1.6 million new voters being added to the rolls since 2018. And when people are hearing the polling, they need to remember a lot of those folks aren't being considered in the polling. Polls are a snapshot. They're not a predictor. But the question is, who are you taking a picture of? And when you look at the picture of the new voters who are on these rolls, and we do the work of turning them out, this will absolutely be a record-breaking and we hope a history-setting election.
Have you heard from any Republicans or independents since you've been on the campaign trail?
Oh, absolutely. Especially Republican women who are devastated by Brian Kemp's decision to ban abortion. They understand that this is an economic issue. You asked the earlier question. They know that women who are forced to carry unwanted pregnancies to term are 4 times more likely to be impoverished. They are twice as likely to be on food stamps within 5 years. They are 60% less likely to have full-time employment. And that's a real economic issue. They are terrified of what's going to happen to the businesses we do have. And that's coming from men and women. We've already lost $50 million because of Brian Kemp's gun bill. We lost $100 million because of his voter suppression law. And we stand to lose a $4.4 billion entertainment industry, not only because of abortion, but because he also doesn't believe in marriage equality. He supports the legislation that would allow people to be rejected based on their sexual orientation. And because of the Supreme Court's current consideration of 303 creative, which most people aren't paying attention to, this case, should they find the way we think they will, it will say that public accommodations laws do not include sexual orientation. And in real and practical terms, that means that a person in the LGBTQ plus community can be kicked out of a hotel, can be denied service in a restaurant, can be refused service at a pharmacy, simply based on their sexual orientation. And Brian Kemp knows that Georgia is one of only 5 states in the nation that does not have a law to protect them at the state level. We will lose the entertainment industry if that happens. And so independents, Republicans, people who normally would be absolutely on his side are absolutely paying attention, and they know that this is for all the marbles. This is a generational moment.
And by the way, just for people who listen to that idea that members of the LGBT community could be kicked out of a hotel room for being gay, for example, and they say, oh, well, that's just Democrats being hysterical. That is the exact same line that they use when Democrats would say that Roe was in danger of being overturned. And now look at where we are. So, we ignore these risks at our own peril. What's the most memorable moment that you've had on the campaign trail so far?
So this past weekend, I had this amazing juxtaposition of a day where this weekend I was with the Latino community, the AAPI community. I went to the Atlanta Arab Festival. I went to the Pride Parade, and then I went to One Music Fest. And seeing the remarkable diversity of our state laid out so beautifully, and knowing that with one job, with one vote, all of these communities will have access to so much more. I know this to be true. It's why I'm so intentional about reaching out to these communities. But it's also a deep reminder of what's at stake if we don't do this right. Because if we don't have a governor who respects and celebrates diversity, these are all communities that will instead find themselves not only on the losing end of issues, but they will be the victims of and the targets of policies to create harm. And to your point about 303 creative, let's be clear. Clarence Thomas said, here are the things he intends to do after he got rid of Roe v. Wade. And this was on the list. Voting rights was on the list. We know that we need a governor who actually wants to protect our rights, not attack our freedoms.
Now, what's your message to those Republicans and independents who may never have voted for a Democrat before, but who see what's happening in the GOP and recognize that it's not great? Like, what do you say to those people?
4 years ago when I ran, I was known for the fact that I work very well across the aisle. I have very strong convictions that are grounded in my political philosophy, but I know that people don't care about our politics. They care about their lives. I want to help improve people's lives. We have a $6.6 billion surplus that we can either squander by giving it to the wealthiest in tax cuts, or we can invest and spend on the issues we've been complaining about for 20 years. Improving education, improving healthcare, improving access to housing, making sure that people can make a good living and take care of themselves and their families, invest in public safety, but also in criminal justice reform, invest in common sense gun laws. We have an opportunity to do the things we need to do. And as a Democrat leading a state that has a Republican legislature, the best bet to make sure that we come to compromise is to make sure no one gets to get their own way. I'm the best way to make certain that we have to work together. I've done it before and I'll do it again.
Let's finish with this. What would day one of an Abrams governorship look like for the people of Georgia? What's the very first thing you would do in office?
Medicaid expansion. Medicaid expansion provides health care to 500,000 Georgians. And what we have to understand that this is a financing mechanism. We're all paying the bill. Right now, it's a $27 billion bill that we keep paying over the last decade. And if we expand Medicaid, that bill gets paid because we've already put the money in. I will also be able to then create 64,000 jobs. This is not hyperbole. When Chris Christie did this in New Jersey, he created 50,000 jobs. Mike Pence created 30,000 jobs. If Mike Pence and I agree, it must be the right thing to do, and it'll be my day one job.
And of course, how can we help?
We need folks to sign up and support this campaign. Please go to StaceyAbrams.com. If you /voting, you can find out about voting if you're a Georgian. If you want to volunteer, just do /volunteer and talk about this race. Talk about how important governors are. Brian, one thing that's so amazing about the show that you do is that people need to understand that politics don't just happen in DC. If your real life matters to you, governors are the most important positions people hold that no one understands. And with the Supreme Court sending all of our rights and protections down to the state level, we need someone at the state level ready to defend us and to defeat those who will target us.
Perfectly put. We'll leave it there. Stacey Abrams, thank you so much for taking the time, and good luck in this last month of campaigning.
Thanks for having me.